Hello and welcome again. This is already the fourth video in the series Dynamic Segmentation Inside Out for AOS-CX. In this video I will be covering user-based tunneling with downloadable user roles. In the previous videos I already showed you how to work with local user roles and downloadable user roles. I will use this setup for showing you how to configure user-based tunneling. Here's what I will demonstrate in this video. I will configure the reserved VLAN, and this is the VLAN that is used as tag VLAN to carry the 802.1p values if they are configured in the role. I will also configure the connection to the gateway so that tunneling can be established. Configure the source IP address for UBT. I will review the configuration on ClearPass, and you will find that it's very easy to configure user-based tunneling with the ClearPass user roles. I will also review the configuration on the gateways, and this is actually exactly the same as user-based tunneling on AOS switch in the likes of the 2930, 3800 and 5400 series switches. And I will also demonstrate multi-zone user-based tunneling. Multi-zone allows you to tunnel to different clusters based on the identity of the endpoint. And I will show you the setup for MAC Authentication, 802.1x, and Captive Portal. Before we start with the configuration, this is the diagram with the setup. You see a gateway cluster that consists of 4 gateways and a conductor, which is previously called the Mobility Master, an AOS switch being a 6300, ClearPass Policy Manager, and some other devices that provide the various services like DNS, NTP, and DHCP. And for the multi-zone demonstration, I have added another gateway that you see in the center of this diagram that I will be using for terminating a camera stream. And as always, it is important to check that you have the proper software versions running on all the devices. If you do not have these versions running in your setup, make sure that you get the latest and greatest to get things working. Now let's dive into the configuration, starting with the switch configuring the reserved VLAN. Okay, so here's the switch. Let me get into configuration mode and start to configure the client VLAN. That's the reserved VLAN. I need to create the VLAN first. Let's create that VLAN 4091. And then I need to create that UBT client VLAN 4091. And then next, let me configure the source IP address for UBT. It is important that the switch is reachable for the gateways, and if the source IP address is not defined, UBT will take the lowest IP address that is configured, and this IP address might not be reachable to the gateways. So that's IP source interface for UBT, and let's configure that to 50 interface here. And then the final step is the configuration of the UBT zones. I will create 2 zones because I'd like to show you the multi-zone functionality as well. I will create the Aruba zone first. UBT zone Aruba. And let me just do the question mark so that you can see what options we have here. So I can configure the primary controller, IP address. Let's assign that to 156, which is one of the controllers or one of the gateways, actually one of the gateways in the cluster. And because I have a cluster, I can also configure a backup controller. And I will just do 157 as the backup controller. And then the only other thing I need to do is enable UBT for that zone. And now let me create another UBT zone, which I will be using for the camera. And there's one single gateway in here for this IoT, which is 192.168.0.160. And I also have to enable UBT for that zone. And that's really it for the switch. Now let's see if we have some connectivity to the gateway. So if I do a show UBT, Uh, Show UBT really shows you the configuration. So I have two zones, Aruba and IoT. You can see the gateways that are configured for each zone, the reserved VLAN, and the state, admin state enabled for both. If I do show UBT state, you can see that for the Aruba zone, I have the primary and secondary. This is ready for bootstrap, and the switch icon controller state. So you can see the switch icon controller is 156, which is the active, and the standby is 159, which is actually one of the other gateways in the cluster. And then for the IoT zone here, that's this part here, I have the primary, which is 192.168.0.160, and you can also see that the switch anchor controller, so the control plane, is registered and active. I can also show you another command, which is show UBT information. UBT information shows you the bucket map, and you know that the bucket map is used for all the authenticated users. What will happen is that each authenticated user will get one of the entries from the bucket map assigned. And so, for example, if you have an authenticated user using bucket map ID 230, the primary data plane will be established. So the primary tunnel, data tunnel, will be established to 157, and the backup tunnel will be established to 158. And this is also something that I will show you later on in the video. Let's move to ClearPass. Really, the configuration of the policies and the services is exactly the same as compared to downloadable user roles and local user roles. There's no difference. The main difference is in the way you configure the profiles. So you configure the roles. For user-based tunneling, you need to define a gateway role. And so I have already configured everything, and let me just show you how things are configured. And I'll start with the 802.1x profile, the 802.1x role. Now, really, the only thing that is, well, the only two things that are different is the fact that you don't have to really define a VLAN anymore, because the VLAN termination takes place on the gateway end. So with UBT, the switch becomes VLAN agnostic for user-based tunneling. It doesn't matter what VLAN is on the switch anymore. The relevance is on the gateway. So that's one difference. The second one is the secondary role type section here. Because we're doing UBT, we're defining this secondary role, this gateway role. And we have two entries here, so two parameters. We have the gateway zone, which for 802.1x is the Aruba zone, and the gateway static role, which is ubt.1x. And this is the role that is configured on the gateway. And I'll show you that later on when we review the gateway configuration. And that's really all there is to it. For all the other things, so for example, you can still assign a policy to the role. So you can still have local policy enforcement on the switch with all the classes and all the QoS and everything that you want. You can still have your PoE priorities, your trust modes and everything. And in addition to that, because you're doing user-based tunneling, you can have the additional gateway capabilities enforced to your endpoint. So that's really the main difference in the profile, is that secondary user role and the and the VLAN. Now what you can see for the camera here is that I am using a different zone because I want to terminate that camera on a different and on a different cluster. So I'm defining gateway zone IoT with the gateway static role UBT camera. And as you can see, I can still assign policies. I can still do things like PoE priority and everything. So that's still possible and still applied to that endpoint. And again, looking at guests, it looks all very similar. Gateway zone Aruba, static role UBT guest. Let me show you the phone. So the phone also terminates at the gateway zone Aruba, and we are applying the UBT phone role from the gateway. And for the redirection role, it's also Aruba, and I'm applying the UBT redirect. Now let me show you the policies. You can see I've got 3 policies here, which are really like a copy of the downloadable user role, local user role policies that I've created earlier. Let me just quickly show them to you. You can see the rule set for 802.1x, user authenticated, and I'm pushing the UBT dir CX 802.1x profile. Let me show you the MAC auth. You can see different rule sets here for the VoIP phone, for the network camera. You can see which profiles I'm pushing here. Really very similar to the policies that I've configured earlier for the downloadable user roles. And then we've got the web auth. Again, actually this is an exact copy of that downloadable user role policy that we've created earlier on. And that's for the policies. Services, let me filter on those services, dir CX. So I've got 3 here, UBT dir CX MAC auth, UBT dir CX web auth, and .1x. Again, exact copies of the services we made earlier. Quickly show you. It's MAC authentication service. I'm doing authentication here, an authorization for that time series, and the enforcement is the UBT dir CX MAC auth. And so this is the web authentication, which is a web-based authentication service using the local user repository as authentication source, and I'm enforcing the UBT dir CX web auth policy. And for the .1x, that's a 802.1x wired service, just doing authentication here with also authenticating to a local user repository, and the enforcement is the UBT dir CX 802.1x. And that's it for ClearPass. Let's move to the gateways. And for the gateways, really the only thing we need to review is the configuration of the roles. So remember the roles, the gateway role names that are configured in ClearPass. So they have to be exactly the same as the role name that is configured on the gateway. And then other than that, there's no difference in the way how roles are configured on the gateways compared to how we do this with AOS switch. But just for the sake of completeness of the demo, I will show you the roles that are configured for the phone, camera, employee, guest, and the captive portal. Let me show you the guest role first. UBT guest, that's this one. And let me show you the advanced view. As you can see that I'm terminating on VLAN 120. And then obviously you can apply and configure all the policies and roles in the layer 7 firewalling there. Let me show you the .1x. .1x is terminating on VLAN 100. I have a UBT redirect that is terminating on VLAN 110. and I should have a UBT phone role here, which also terminates on VLAN 110. Let's move to the other gateway and show the configuration. So on this gateway, I will be terminating the camera. Let me check out the camera role here. So again, you can do all the layer 2 stuff, the layer 7 firewalling here if you want. Let's go to the advanced view and let me check out on which VLAN this camera terminates. It should be terminating on VLAN 1. And you can see here that it's terminating on VLAN 1. Now let's see if everything is working. I will start by connecting a phone to interface 112 and see what the access tracker in ClearPass is saying. Okay, let's go to the access tracker and you can see that there is a successful authentication here. It is sending the UBT CX phone to the switch. Let's check out the switch. So let me do a show port access client interface 112 detail. You can see that the role is applied. It's a ClearPass role. And you can see that VLAN 4091 is applied, which means that we're establishing a tunnel. You can see the gateway zone here and the gateway role that is applied. And in addition, as said, you can also still apply a policy to that endpoint. If I do a show UBT user, I can also see that there is a user connected and that there's actually an active tunnel to one of the gateways using the UBT phone secondary user role. Okay, and now let me connect a 802.1x client on the back of the phone and see if the login is successful. Yeah, well, actually, you can already see that it is successful here. I'm pushing the UBT CX 802.1x role back to the switch. And you should be seeing that this, yeah, so this is associating the gateway zone here, Aruba gateway role UBT.1x. Show that on the switch. Client interface 112, just to a summary. You can see that I have a MAC authenticated phone and a .1x authenticated, well, laptop. Showing the UBT users. There you go. You got the .1x and the phone user being tunneled to the gateways. There's actually another command that you can issue, which is the show UBT state command. And with the UBT state command, you can see that the clients are also registered. You can see that here. So this is the phone, it's registered, and you can see that it's using bucket ID 209. For the .1x user, you can see that it is using bucket ID 188. Now, as I showed you earlier, what you can do is you can do a show UBT information. So remember the bucket ID for the phone, which is 209. So if I do a show UBT information, when I check out bucket ID 209, you can see that The primary gateway, so the primary user anchor controller is 157 and the secondary is 158. This means that the phone has a primary data plane connection to 157. And then obviously the same for the .1x client, which was 188. If I check out 188 for the 802.1x client, the primary user anchor controller is 158. So here's where you can see the load balancing kicking in for UBT, for user-based tunneling. Let's move to the gateway cluster. And actually what you can see here, you should see two clients here. You should see the employee, so the 802.1x user, and the phone. However, you only see the .1x user and not the phone. The reason for this is that the phone, for some reason, the phone does not obtain an IP address. And if there's no IP address information available, the gateway cannot identify the tunnel user. The tunnel is there, but it's not displayed on the GUI. And let me show you this on the gateway CLI. Remember the bucket map entry? The bucket map entry showed that the phone is terminated on 157. So that's this one here. 209 was the bucket entry. And so what I have is I have this terminal session here open to that gateway. Let me issue the following command: show tunnel node manager tunnel users. And this shows you the tunnel user. It shows you the tunnel user MAC address. All right, so you can see that the actual tunnel is there. However, when I do a show data path user, it also shows you the MAC address of that phone, but there's no IP address attached to that phone. The gateway does not see any IP information passing by for that phone. And therefore, and that's really the reason why you don't see that that phone in the tunnel user list. The tunnel is there, but there's no IP address. Let's move to Captive Portal. I've got the client here, enabling the client, and by enabling that interface, I should be getting a Captive Portal redirection. There you go. And let me just log on to that Captive Portal. The port bounce takes place and the client should be redirected to another role, which is the UBT role for guest. And here's what's happening in the access tracker. You can see the first authentication sending the redirect. So it's sending the redirect here, and you can see that it is establishing a tunnel to the gateway zone Aruba with gateway role UBT redirect. And the second authentication, the web auth, takes place, which updates the Captive Portal update expiry, and it bounces the switch port. And then in the third authentication, you can see that the UBT DIR CX guest role is returned, which is terminating at gateway zone Aruba with gateway role UBT guest. And let's see if that is the case. So I should see another client here, which is the guest client. There you go, tunnel user. It's using the guest role. Okay, I also promised you to show you multi-zoning functionality. Now I've just connected a camera to one of the switch ports. I believe it's 112. Let me show you that. Client interface 112. Yes, so the camera is connected. So you can see the MAC address here, and you can see that this camera role is being pushed. And it's being pushed to gateway zone IoT with the gateway role UBT camera. Okay, let's check out the access tracker. You can see the accept here with the output, the gateway zone there. Cool. So this camera has been identified as IP camera in the endpoints database. So that's where the classification takes place. If I move to the dashboard of the IoT controller, you can see here that I have a UBT client, a wired client connected. There you go. It has IP address 192.168.0.246, and it's a camera. I can also add some more information, obviously, on the gateway here. So that's all working. Well, that's it for now. There's much more to come on dynamic segmentation. Watch the space. If you like the video, you can hit that thumbs up button. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please let us know. Thanks for watching again, and I hope to see you back soon on this channel.